Hello everyone. Thank you for joining us today for this terrific webinar coming up. I am Catherine Lawrence. I work with the Science Gateways Community Institute, and I just want to go over a few things of logistics before we get going and to tell you a little bit about the Science Gateways Community Institute. So we'd like you to keep your audio muted throughout this presentation. If you have a question, you can put a question in through chat. And if the presenter needs a little more clarification, then you could unmute yourself. But for the most part, just to keep things from getting too chaotic, put your notes through chat, and I will share them with Anne as appropriate. Also, this will be posted on our website, and that will include both the recording and the slides. So that look out for that in the next day or so. Usually it gets up there pretty quickly. So I'm just going to tell you a little bit about the Science Gateways Community Institute and the different ways that we support the Science Gateways community. We exist because the National Science Foundation has funded us to provide online and in-person resources and services. And really, the community part of the name is important to that because we want people to come together to share experiences and expertise, also technologies or best practices, just as this webinar is offering today. So there are 5 main service areas of the Institute, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about each one. The incubator is just modeled just after a regular commercial entrepreneurial incubator in that it is providing expertise that is shared to learn about very specific things that you might need to know for creating Gateway. And so we have consultants who can talk about things like cybersecurity, usability, technology choices, and we also have a boot camp, which is a week-long intensive program for Gateway builders. Our extended developer support is also a consulting service, but in this case, you can have someone up to quarter time work on your Gateway for anywhere from 3 months to a year, and they can develop something specific to your Gateway or help with something like a specific module, or even get your Gateway going. The Scientific Software Collaborative is the source of our Gateway catalog, which is available on our website, and that is meant to be a place for you to discover existing gateways that you might want to see how they function and or use them in your own research or teaching, but also it has software components for building gateways, so you can find it as a resource for how to expand your gateway itself. Community engagement and exchange is the area that provides this webinar, as well as our annual conference, which is coming up at the end of this month. And also we provide the website resources. So we have many places on our website where we certainly look for your input, and if you have news or resources that you want to add, have a look around our website and you can contribute them as well. And finally, our workforce development area provides a number of programs oriented at students and faculty who are wanting to grow the pipeline of new Gateway developers, and they have a number of events, including a summer coding institute, a hackathon, internships, and also workshops at different times throughout the year. There's also Young Professionals Network, and that's a way to connect with other people interested in this that are both mentors and students. So with that, I just want to put in one brief pitch to request your input at the end of this to give us feedback. There's our evaluation has 3 questions. The first 2 take less than a couple seconds to answer, just long enough to read it, and you can click yes or no. And then the last one is about the suggestions for other topics that we might have. So we hope that you'll chime in with any feedback that you have at the end of this, and I'll put this URL in our chat area as well, so it's easy for you to find. So with that, I'm going to hand this off to Anne Zimmerman. I'm going to stop sharing and let her get set up with sharing. I am really pleased to be able to have Anne Zimmerman featured today as our webinar presenter. She runs her own consulting firm that consults with people about evaluation of various kinds of research projects. And so she's given a lot of thought to metrics and how to keep an eye on what it is your gateway is doing and whether it's really accomplishing what it is that you've set out to accomplish. I'll also mention that part of the reason we invited her to do this is because she gave a workshop tutorial at our last conference in 2017, and we thought that this would be a great thing to do a reprise to help our community have this available for future use. So Anne, when you're ready, go ahead and share your screen, and we'll let you take it away.
Okay, I think that you should be, let me try it again. Okay. And
yep, there it is.
There it is?
Yes.
Yeah, I'll hide that little thing. Okay. All right. Well, thanks so much, Catherine, and the Institute in general for inviting me. Really happy to be here. Gateways is actually something I've known about for a while. I've actually done just a little bit of research on a while ago when I was back in academia. So I'm excited to be back working in that arena again. Let me just tell you a little bit about myself so you have some context about where I'm coming from. It might sound kind of corny, but I like to think of myself as someone who collaborates with people who want to make a difference. I think all of the gateways that I'm aware of, the people I know who are working on them are just really passionate about whatever it is they're doing, whether it's to provide high performance computing resources to help scientists to accomplish their work in ways they couldn't before, to get it done more quickly, whether it's an online mentoring for between scientists and students, whatever the gateway is about, people really want to make a difference. And those are the kinds of people that I really enjoy working with and am lucky to be working with. And I can say that in all cases of my projects. So although I do a lot of evaluation in sort of a kind of strict sense, what I really like to do or do parts of is kind of the whole sort of planning a program, trying to figure out what it is that what goal you're trying to meet, and then to try to design activities and services that would seem like they would help you accomplish that goal, help people monitor whether they're executing what they think they planned out, and then the sort of evaluation, are you making some progress toward those goals? And then not having it stop there. Nothing drives me more crazy. Often we do have to do reports and things, but really like to see information from evaluation be used to make decisions, to communicate what you're doing, and kind of leading into, I really like it when the results of what people have done is shared with others. So, and it doesn't just sit there on the shelf. Sometimes you want to keep it internal for good reasons, but it's also nice to see it shared with other people who can learn. So what I'm going to cover today in terms of developing meaningful metrics is I'm going to start with just the foundations of meaningful metrics. Some things that need to come before you even sit down and start thinking about what your metrics will be. Then I'm going to talk just briefly about what is a metric, and you'll find out that I actually don't like that word very much. I'll offer an alternative, but then I'll go back to talking about metrics because that's what the term most people are familiar with. And then we'll actually get into, I have a kind of just a simple worksheet I put together with some examples from gateways, and just kind of step through this process using the foundation and just seeing how could we develop some metrics for gateways. And I'll tell you right now that it's, I hope that you will leave this webinar, inspired to give this a try. The sort of process I'm going to talk about, believe that the approach that I'm talking about can really be useful to you. And they'll try to give you a straightforward way to go about it, but it does take some practice, and you'll see from my own examples that they have plenty of warts on them, and it's an iterative process, and I'm sure some of you could make these better, and if we had a different format, it would be fun to work on these together and refine them. And so this is about showing you what it's really like to try to do this and give you an approach, and not striving for perfection, but just trying to get there and develop a way of thinking, because my belief is that you can do a lot of good evaluation of your gateway just by developing a way of thinking. And this is what I'm going to present today, is kind of, to me, developing a way of thinking about your gateway success, what it means, how you get there, and how you'll know if you got there. So the foundations to meaningful metrics really comprised of two things: goals and outcomes. And let's not, throughout this, I'm going to offer some definitions just because we need some sort of common ground. But then I'm going to say, let's not get hung up on what's a goal, what's an objective, what's a mission, what's a whatever. Let's just, kind of put some slides out there with some definitions and what an outcome is and all that. But then let's not get hung up on it, because if you start getting hung up on that stuff, you'll just never make any progress on what's really important. So let's talk first about goals. So you'll notice that I'm not starting with metrics. So what typically happens, or what frequently happens, is people will come to me, and the other thing I want to notice that's missing on this slide is today I'm not going to be talking about how to measure the metrics so what methodologies you might use. I can kind of actually toward the end sort of say, well, here's one way you might go about it, here's another way. But I'm sort of stopping short of methods that you would use to actually measure your metrics. But typically, often what happens to me, although I think maybe a little less so, because I think people are being forced to sort of think more about evaluation, because as some of you know, NSF now requires an evaluation plan that asks for very specific things. It might ask you to work with an evaluator. And so I think people are getting more sophisticated. What has often happened in the past is people come to me and they'll say, Ann, we want to do a survey. And I'll say, okay, tell me a little bit about what you want to find out through that survey. What are you trying to, so if it's for a workshop, a lot of us do workshops, organize workshops, because, it's often an important or a useful way to maybe get word out about our gateway, help train people to do something with our gateway. And so the reason I'll say, what do you want people to walk away from out of this workshop? Do you want them to actually know how to use your gateway inside and out, at a pretty sophisticated level? Do you want them to just be aware of it and maybe have some chance to play around with it? Is this kind of an exploratory workshop where you're bringing people together to learn more about their needs for your gateway? So I would explore all those kinds of things with them, and then we have a better idea what the goal for the workshop is. And then we can start talking about, okay, what do we want to know from there? So you start with the goals. And as a foundation, this is just kind of reiterating the main point of this particular section, is that goals and outcomes are just essential to metrics. And like I said, I hope to convince you by the end that starting this way, instead of starting with metrics or starting with the methods that you're going to use for evaluation, that you start with goals and then outcomes from those goals. So what are goals? Just simple definition. Like I said, let's not get hung up on objectives versus whatever. But simple way to define them: general statement of your purpose, what your success looks like. That's the kind of, I think, the sentence that I like the most. But let's go a little bit, let's get away from the abstract and let's go into some example gateway goals. And this is just a little plug for the Science Gateway Catalog, which you can find on the Science Gateway Community Institute website. And I searched through there and just found some gateways. I'm cheating a little. I was aware of quite a few of them before, but I picked some I was aware of and some I wasn't. I was less aware of. So here's an example gateway goal. This is from Planting Science, which is a pretty cool website, and I know Katrina, who's gotten to know her a little bit, who's involved with it, and she has done some interesting evaluation of her gateway, and this is from her website, so you can read that here. So this is more of an educational, getting students and scientists mentoring students. Here's another example. This is from NERST, and I put the URLs here if any of you want to explore those further. This is a third example. This is maybe, a little broader than a goal, but you could certainly break this down into different goals. The idea is, all of these are talking about, what difference do they want to make in the world? They're talking about it at various levels, but let's just consider them all goals for what they want to do. And so you can see, there's this range of gateways are very broad in what they're trying to do. And so I know there are probably people in the audience who are from, doing very different kinds of things with gateways. So I'm trying to touch on maybe, hopefully, something that will resonate with you, if not here in these example goals, then later when we step through some of the metrics. Okay, so that's just a quick run through on what goals are. Now let's talk a little bit about what outcomes are. Again, I don't like to, use too much language that's kind of evaluative or whatever, but this is, I guess, as good a way as any to talk about it. And I think you're all probably used to becoming, used to thinking in this way. So in the context of evaluation, an outcome is sort of something that happened, and hopefully something positive that occurred because of activities or services that your gateway provides. And I'm not spending time talking about it here today because we're focusing on metrics, but a really important thing to keep in mind is that your gateway has particular goals, and you've set up a set of activities or services that you think are going to help you achieve those goals. And so, those things grow out of what you want to do. And it's really in evaluation, what you're trying to figure out is if those things you're doing, those services and activities, are leading you in the direction of your success. So it's really important, I think this is an important definition. these things happen because of what you're doing. When I talk about outcomes, I'm talking about changes. And we're going to talk about the fact that not all metrics have to do with trying to assess or understand whether a change is occurring. But I think the most important part of what every gateway that I can think of, and just really about any kind of social change activity, which is, I think, what most of you are about, you're trying to make some sort of change, and it's generally to people, to policy, and so, it can be from making somebody aware of something. So I talked about a workshop where you might just, the first step about somebody even coming to your gateway is that they know about it. And then you can kind of, go up the chain a little bit to knowledge, attitude. Maybe these are not all in a chain, but, you want to change somebody's attitude about something. You want to help improve their skills. All these kinds of things. These are and a lot of these are things, people are the source of change. So you're trying to get people to do something different in many cases because you think that's going to make their life better in some way. Okay, so these are just some example outcomes that I extracted or from different, that might be applicable to gateways. Yeah, well, I think they are sort of extracted them. And I'll just let you read these as they pop up on the screen. And later we'll be putting these together, goals, outcomes, and metrics. Oops. So just to kind of, start us thinking about what might those look like. Generally, there's really a chain of outcomes, and not all of these are necessarily changes in something that people do, and that's why I put outcomes in quotes here, is that there are a lot of foundational things that you have to do, as you all well know, to get a gateway up and running. And, first it has to exist, for one thing, and that's, that's no small chore in and of itself. And you might have metrics that and I'm certainly involved at times with this, have metrics that you use, to help monitor your progress as that's going. I know a lot of you are, good project managers, and you're very good at this part, and about learning about the needs of your users. That feeds into why your gateway is the way it is, and why the services and activities that you develop, or the tools, it's based on the needs of the community you're trying to serve. So there's all this work that goes on that has to be there before you even start. And when you really want to start, having your gateway serve people, people have to learn about it. They have to be interested enough to come back. They have to try it. You hope they stay and actually use it, that they don't come in and out. And then ultimately, I think, in many cases, you want people to do something that they couldn't have done easily or at all without your gateway. So if you think about, people learning about the gateway, is just, increasing their awareness. Using it is, maybe you need to have an activity that is a training workshop that teaches them how to use it. So I think we often forget about all these kind of things that have to happen. I don't think we forget about them, but maybe we don't always think about them in quite this way, and we maybe want to jump to, measuring whether they've done something they couldn't do without it. And it is often what we want to get to, but we have to recognize that there are some steps that have to occur before that. So now let's move on to metrics. And this is my little, you'll see me go a little schizophrenic here. I don't like the word metrics because it really implies to most of us, I think, something that's quantitative. So I much prefer the word indicators because indicators can be both quantitative or qualitative. And I also like the way that what you're trying to do through metrics is figure out is to find something, and we'll see this a little more clearly later, is to find something that helps you that indicates that you're achieving the outcome that you want. Not everything can be measured as black and white as we like it to be. In fact, some of the most interesting things that we want to do with our gateways are, hard to define strictly by quantitative measures. So I'm going to bounce back and forth. I'll mostly stick to the word metrics, but I really like the word indicators because of that, it's indicating something, and it's qualitative and quantitative. Something that I've learned the longer I've been in evaluation and working with different people is that the term metrics is not only used in sort of, to mean something quantitative a lot of times, but I sort of struggle with what word to come up with here, but I think situational is what I decided. And sometimes there's confusion here. And so I just, in case there, I wanted to just kind of talk about different ways, two main ways that metrics can be used. There might be others as well. But one way, and we're seeing this more and more, and actually the Science Gateway Community Institute uses a scorecard. And scorecards have been used in the business world for a long time, and they've, begun to show up in other sectors as, I think the Institute is a perfect example of. A scorecard is sort of a relatively small set of numbers that are intended to kind of provide an absolute sort of a pulse on a business or a project. And they're collected on a regular basis. They're generally quantitative. They help monitor the key progress of organizational goals. And this gets a little confusing, so I have a graphic later that I'll show you. It makes me think that if people are interested in scorecards, that maybe one of the SGCI folks like Nancy would, that might be a good topic for a webinar in the future. And Nancy, if you're here, sorry I didn't give you a heads up about that, but I thought about that later. And I would say that scorecards are more for operational purposes. And they are important as well. And does a scorecard metrics end up being used in evaluation? Totally. Are they only kind of metrics that's used in evaluation? I would say in most cases, no. If you're looking to evaluate an outcome, operational sort of scorecard metrics are not going to be the only metrics you're going to use. Whereas evaluation is sort of periodic, episodic, uses indicators. It sort of digs deeper, into understanding if we aren't meeting the metrics that we see in our scorecard, why is that? Or what else are we seeing that we didn't expect? I don't like the word judgment, but, evaluation really is about sort of making value assessments. Not always in a punitive way. That's why I don't like the word judgment, but to help us understand if we're getting where we want to go. So here's just kind of an example of a scorecard. I admit I couldn't find one really good that's applicable to gateways, but you can see, you look at this and you get a quick, overview, or you can just, kind of spend a few minutes on this page and get a quick overview. That's really what I wanted to illustrate here. Where, as I was talking about, evaluation is more about kind of digging a little deeper, understanding are things working the way you thought they would? Are the activities you put together the ones, that seem to, be working out as you thought they would? You go into a project and you kind of hypothesize that this is what people need and this is what we need to help offer them to get to that point. And, you learn, whether you do formal evaluation or not, you learn kind of, those kinds of things, whether things are going the way you thought. And I'm focusing on metrics for evaluation, so I'm not talking about metrics for scorecards, and it's kind of a different process. Oops. So I just wanted to go, after showing those two graphics, just kind of wanted to remind you sort of what the different ones are. So I kind of talked about this a little bit already. I've focused a lot on the third bullet, which is outcomes. But as I also said earlier, metrics in evaluation can be used in different ways. So that's just a kind of reminder, whether your program was implemented as planned is just a sort of fancy way of saying, did you get your gateway started? Did you get the staff in place that you needed? All those things that you need to do before. If you had targets set, for the number of users you wanted, are you seeing that? So sort of reflect changes to something that you wanted. Just quickly, sort of, there are different types of indicators and they're both valuable. And I think that I make this point because sometimes I think that we don't equally value information that's not as black and white. And I think, we don't want to get into methods wars or anything like that, but you really need both if you're studying something that's complex. So after that sort of all of that, if you look at this list, and I just sort of ask you to think this to yourself, if you saw this list, is this a list of meaningful metrics? Well, these might very well be metrics that you would use in a gateway. That's certainly the case. But we don't see them connected to goals. We don't see them connected to outcomes. It's just a list. It doesn't tell us much about what the context is. So how can we go about developing more meaningful metrics? And Catherine, I presume there haven't been any clarifying questions. I've got my screen up here in front of me and I'm not seeing any chat. So let me just stop there and ask.
So there have been, Nancy said she's happy to share SGCI's approach to the scorecard. We got one comment which said, instead of the work judgment, evaluation measures value and use for the people being served by the program or network. Evaluation is situational, not judgmental. That's from.
I like that.
Yeah.
I like that. If you can capture that for me, I'd love to.
Yes.
That. With the person from
someone named Sandra LaRue, something like that. Anyway.
Thank you, Sandra.
Yeah, not the Sandra from SGCI, but another Sandra. So,
yeah.
But no questions specifically.
Okay, do feel free to interrupt.
Yeah, okay. Will do.
Okay, so let's go through some examples of how we might develop metrics based on goals and outcomes that are gateway related. And let me just, having just kind of gotten ready for this presentation and thinking about this for SGCI, let me tell you, it hurts a little bit. So if your head hurts, that's the way it is. None of these are meant to be complete. I wanted to illustrate kind of a couple of things here. First of all, again, let's not get too worried about terminology. Because as you go through the process, those things will clarify themselves. So one goal, This might be for a citizen science projects. Citizen science, participate in science by contributing high quality data. And the thing you're going to notice that I tried to emphasize with the goals, the outcomes, and even the indicators is that we're talking about people. We're trying to get people to do things or to, gain experiences or so we're, it's not some, we're really trying to make some sort of change that in what maybe people do or know or are aware of that will help them do something that we think will be valuable. So I purposely have tried to bring the people back in and recognize that, as I show in this first goal, so an outcome might be that citizen scientists collect data following scientific protocols. And so before you even get to kind of doing training people, is you have to develop the workshop. Is that a change in someone? It's a different kind of, it's not really an outcome. It's something you have to do to implement the program. And this is just recognizing that. You get people to attend, some of these things you all intuitively know, and you measure how many people, and maybe you have thoughts about what type of people are the most likely to be, good citizen scientists. They belong to, are they members of some nature organizations or something, so you might have some ideas about the type of people you want to attract. And then, maybe in the case of where you're trying to get citizen scientists to collect data that scientists might use, is that you really want to spend some time training them on protocols, and you might actually have them take a test. In a lot of training things, we don't necessarily have people take tests or observe them doing something, but this might be a case where you want to. So these are just some examples of different kinds of indicators you might use here. How, you need them to upload data to the gateway. And then you need, hopefully, scientists will actually use the data. And you'll see the outcome is blank because I was sort of like, oh, let's see, is that the outcome? Is that the goal? Anyway, so like, forget it. I'm just going to go on to what some indicators might be there. Then you'll see I'm stopping short about talking about methods. A lot of these you can think of methods for. These aren't too hard, I think. How you would get feedback from them on the data quality could be done in different ways. It could be done through some sort of rating system on the gateway. It could be done through, when people use, you could do some sort of survey. That's something you have to think about. What can you afford to do? What seems like it'll give you the type of information you want? If you want to track acknowledgements, then you have to have a way to do that. How are you going to figure out if people acknowledge? You're going to ask them to, you're going to search abstract somewhere. So those are some ways that you might actually go about getting information about the indicators. Here's more of an educational type of example. And this kind of is inspired by planting science, but I do not, I don't want Katrina to think that, I sort of took that as inspiration and then tried to develop some outcomes and indicators from here. So again, I'm emphasizing the people that are involved and what you're trying to achieve by having, what you're trying to sort of change in the world. And so in the case of planting science, they sort of have three different kind of populations that they're trying to help. And that's, students, teachers, and I didn't go ahead and, outline a goal for teachers there. It was just to say, there's often maybe multiple groups, and you need to think about what are the outcomes for the different groups that we're trying to reach. And so, I know that Katrina has thought a lot about the matching process between mentors, trying to find, using their system, trying to help people find the mentors that would be good for their students' projects. And that's kind of complex to think about. How do we know that that's happening? Because they have, I think, hundreds of, people involved in their gateway. So there's some technical ways you might do that. Some of these indicators might take a couple, several ways to measure them. And so some of your activities are also going to be tied to these indicators, like I said before. So if you want mentors to follow effective mentoring practices, perhaps you need to provide them, and I know that in the case of Planting Science, they do provide some resources for mentors to kind of help them do better mentoring. So part of what you might be looking at there is how effective do those guidelines seem to be. And you might measure that by getting feedback from mentors. You might, indirectly get it from students' reactions to their mentoring experience. So you can see a range of different kinds of methods you might use to actually answer these. And I'll talk later about how do you decide, what outcomes are you going to focus on? How much do you invest in different indicators? And then I just had one last example here. And the reason I chose this is because often, especially with projects I've worked at and with, is that they're trying to enable science. They're trying to help researchers do things they couldn't otherwise do in order to generate new knowledge. And so this was kind of, this list here was, or this sort of slide was inspired by, and I also did some adaptation of it, from a presentation that Mark Miller did on Cyprus. And so he actually had, he had listed these not quite as outcomes in his slides, but to me, they were outcomes. And then he actually had some indicators listed in his slides. And I thought some of these were, because often what happens is people jump to how many publications were produced. Well, I think Mark had a really nice kind of ideas about other things. We have what we call our lagging indicators, and publications are lagging indicators because it takes a long time to get a publication out. It's also very hard, as many of you know, to tie a publication produced back to your gateway. How much of it was really from your gateway, and all kinds of things go into making a publication. That's not to say, I think, you don't measure publications. It's pretty much, something you need to do for all kinds of reasons. But I thought Mark had a nice list of things that, what kinds of things might lead up to publications. And so we could spend probably a whole webinar on this, and still there, this is an area where, I think the methods have some time to be developed, but I also think that we haven't spent enough time thinking about what are sort of predictive indicators to publications. What kinds of things could we look for before you get there? And the second thing that I think, if publications are really important to gateways, we should think, and you're in this type of gateway, is there something you could do that would, help result in more publications? So for example, I know that Linda Hayden in Workforce Development for SGCI actually had a small amount of funding to help students get publications edited. Okay, so to me, that's a kind of a creative way of thinking about actually doing an activity that might lead more directly to publications, or at least facilitate that. So that's just a little learning from people doing things. So I promised a checklist, and So just to kind of summarize, you need to be able to state your goals. You are in the best position to be able to do that. I think many of you already have goals. I know you do have goals. Then you draft the main outcomes for those goals. You are also well, positioned to draft the outcomes, although you might need to, might require a little bit of different way of thinking about it. Then it's about, you can't measure everything and you shouldn't measure everything. So you need to decide what are your highest priority outcomes. And the next slide will talk a little bit about how do you figure that out. Then I sort of said brainstorm indicators, metrics, because I want you to sort of free up your mind and not get, thing about a workshop or worksheet is it can kind of not be fluid. And I think you really maybe just need to get out a whiteboard and or a big notepad and just brainstorm and don't be judging. Otherwise it just gets to be an awful icky exercise. And then from there, then that's when you're going to start thinking about methods to actually collect the data. And you have to, at some, maybe all along the way, you're going to have to determine what's possible with the resources that you have. Yep. So I said I would talk a little bit to that one of the bullets in the previous slide about how you prioritize what to evaluate. And here are some ways that I've come up with to think about. Which, we often have, and we're all, I think, in, sort of forced to do this. We have to have pretty, high goals to achieve a lot of times in order to get funded or, but really, given the resources that you have, what is it realistic for you to be able to achieve? So this isn't even about outcomes per se. It's asking well, it is about outcomes, but it's about asking yourself, what can we realistically do? Trying to measure an outcome that you really don't have the resources to do is, so I think it's just an honest first step. What's most important to your gateway success? Certainly, your activities and the services you provide together are important, but are there some ways, if it doesn't happen, it's going to be difficult to have an impact. So, for example, if the right type of people who could really make use of your gateway or would make use of it and then promote it, don't come, that might be a big problem. What is the point at which things might come to a halt? What do you need to help you know if you are making progress? And that's going to change over time, and your metrics might change over time. So these things aren't set in stone. So this is maybe a question you would ask yourself, and the one before too as well. At different points in time, those answers might be different. I think it's worthwhile asking which things are most important to your users, which are important to other key stakeholders, maybe partners, funders. And what things, again, this is kind of related to the first bullet, what outcomes or what things that you want to see happen are actually really within your control? I think that's just another good thing to ask yourself. You can have, certain effects on the world through your gateway, but there are probably things that, I know there are things that would just be outside of your ability to control. So just to summarize, goals and outcomes, getting those articulated, take a first stab at it. Again, don't get over worried about the terminology, but they are fundamental. You don't start with how you want to measure something without knowing why and what you hope to, what that looks like if you are successful. What does it look like? What is somebody going to be able to do? How are they going to be different? And so when you really get to kind of the ways you want people to be different, you need to think about what needs to change. Maybe first they need to be aware, then they need to know how to use it, then they need to, use it to get results published in a journal. Sometimes things that are novel aren't as well accepted by a scientific community. So, actually getting peers to accept those results can be a big achievement. And alas, not everything you want to know can be measured, nor often can you afford to measure it. So, we're certainly restricted by resources, but I really believe that if you start to think in this sort of way, in this logic, as opposed to kind of starting with how you're going to measure, that you can actually be doing a lot of evaluation as you go. For some reason, doesn't want to go to the next slide. I'm just hung up here for 1 second. There we go.
Oh yeah, okay.
There we go. And so I guess my final message is, we really are, all of us, I think, being called upon to show, the value that we're adding. Not that we're just doing X number of things. Nothing wrong. Outputs, the things that you do are very important. Offering workshops, serving people at a certain level. Those are important things, and they're precursors in a lot of ways to actually having social value. But if you think of yourself as standing up in front of a review committee or whoever, your funder or somebody you're trying to convince user to use your thing, is to use your gateway, is instead of saying, here we had these goals and we use these metrics to identify whether we were succeeding, if you can tell a story that clearly connects, is very clear about what goals you're trying to achieve, what needs to happen, what do people need to do, so those outcomes, you're very clear about what needs to happen. And then you can say, we looked at this and we saw things that indicated we were making progress here, but maybe not as well here. So we adjusted what we were doing and then we tried it again. I think that's a story that's much more compelling, clear, doesn't leave much doubt in people's mind about what it is you're trying to do with your gateway. And I put Jane Addams here because, she's the sort of mother of social work. But I think she's also, did she count how many people she served? Yeah, perhaps, but she was also looking to make some sort of a difference in their life, in their situation, get them out of poverty or whatever. So that's, kind of the high goal. So with that, I thank you so much for attending, and I do really appreciate if people would fill out the survey. I appreciate any feedback, or feel free to get in touch.
Thanks, Anne. So we have about 6 minutes left for Q&A, and while people jot down your email address, we'll slowly get my slide up just with some follow-up information. But there are a few questions that came in. One question came in asking if there are additional good, easy to understand resources in Marissa said, in my case, Evaluation for Dummies, that you'd be willing to refer someone to. And one person posted a link to a free Program Evaluation 101 webinar on YouTube, which we can repost when we put the slides and recording up. But I wondered, but as far as like reading materials or websites or so forth, do you have additional recommendations?
I do. And we can actually, I did a tutorial um, last year at the SGCI conference, and I sort of had a handout with some resources there, and I was actually just kind of updating that a little bit. So Catherine, I'll send that along, and you can post that with the slides if you want. And then if the person also wants to, contact me, I'll go ahead and send it. But know that we'll add it as a handout to the seminar, to the
Terrific.
webinar. Yeah.
And will your handout have your email on it too, so that'll be
Yeah.
handy? Okay,
Yep.
great.
Yep. And there's also, I'd have to dig a little bit, but in the conference proceedings from last year's SGCI conference, the materials that I did from the tutorial are in the conference repository. So.
Oh, on Figshare. Okay, great. So
Mhm.
we could put a link to that as well. That's a great
Mhm.
idea. Okay,
Mhm.
fantastic. Thanks for reminding me about that. And then so here's another question from Albert, who says some goals are defined high level. So for example,
Mhm.
uptake of your products. Um,
Mhm.
in that case, downloads itself are not a good metric or indicator, as you don't know if the product actually got used after it was downloaded.
Right.
However, this is a long question, just so you know. However, agencies like NSF like to know how your gateway is changing science. So, number of publications is one of the main outputs for scientists, and you
Mhm.
touched upon this already. But publications are not ideal metrics as they take a long time. So, what would be better alternative metrics to measure impact or uptake of your tool within the science community? Or would uptake be something that can't be measured?
No, I do think uptake can be measured. And I think that, let's see, I could share my screen. I think it actually, I would suggest a couple of things. I think that, oops, I didn't replace you, did I,
Oh, you
Catherine?
can't. No, go ahead. You can replace me. That's fine.
Okay, I just wanted to bring up the slide uh, that I had drawn from Mark Miller. I think he had some kind of useful ways of thinking about that, at least, sort of leading up to uptake, right? Um, he had a percentage of Exceed users who run the jobs from their gateway. So I think it was a pretty astounding percent. And that's kind of beside the point, but looking at kind of where is your usage coming from? If, in this case, he was able to get a percentage. He also looked at where they were coming from. So that's kind of, early on. Um, so I think,
By the way, we can't see the slide. I don't know if you tried to share it or not.
oh, I did. Let's see why that didn't work. Don't wanna, try again here. Okay, it
Here we go.
should
Yep,
pop up.
here it's coming.
Yep.
Yeah.
So these are some sort of, I've actually started to kind of compile um, different ways that people have gone about this. I think there's multiple ways. It depends on how many resources you have. You can certainly, um, so I guess I would say there's just a plethora of ways. Are any of them on their own perfect? Uh, no, but I think that you could, still learn a lot and, make some case about uptake. I think NanoHub it has done a lot of work in this area. So there are definitely places to look, and perhaps just collating all of these at some point would be a good thing to do. I hope that answers your question, Albert. I know it probably sounds a little uh, wide-ranging answer.
Um,
It's definitely not easy.
yeah, yeah, no kidding. I know. I'll vouch for that. Albert says, yes, this is great. Thank you. And he'll look into NanoHub as well. So that's great. Well, we have managed to use up our hour of time. So I want to thank everyone, and particularly Anne, for joining us. I'm going to share my screen again just to briefly mention we do have this webinar every month on the second Wednesday, although November we may move it because of the supercomputing conference. We're just confirming whether we can do that with our presenter, who is Elise Auerbach. She gave one of the keynotes at our 2017 conference, and it was terrifically helpful for people who want to understand better how to communicate the value of their gateway. So it's sort of like what comes after metrics? Well, then or indicators, let people know how great you are. So our October, because of some musical chairs and scheduling, our October webinar is not yet selected or confirmed. But we will be notifying people on our newsletter about that in the coming week. So keep your eyes peeled for that as well. So I want to thank everyone for joining us and for providing questions and comments. And I look forward to seeing you at future events. And thank you, Anne. And we'll make sure your slides and recording and everything, handouts are made available. So with that, we'll see you guys next time.